Okay then, we should be live. It's been a little while since I've actually been live, however, so we shall see if YouTube wants to play ball, which it looks like it does. A little bit early, but I figured now was as good a time as any to actually start, because everything was set up, and there's no sense in prolonging this. And also there is something of a soft limit on how long I can actually stream for. And it's always good to have a little bit more leeway in that regard. What's this? Nothing important. But yeah, and it won't just be a Q&A either. There is actually something I realised, something useful that I can actually do during this live stream, and that is, there are a couple of new factions that have been added to Silmarillion and Total War. If any of you have seen J-Monster's stream on that, then this will be something of repeated information, and I'm a little bit less informed than J-Monster actually is. But still, you'll be able to get my perspective on that as well, because 2 new factions have been added, and that's always a neat thing. Hello there, GCK. Nice to have you around. Yeah, I have to say, one thing that has been good since the change of location is the fact that the internet seems to be significantly better than it used to be. That's a little bit in the way there. Let's go with that. OBS, I seem to remember, was a little bit more of a problem there, but we'll give it a little bit more time, because I did say that I was actually going to start streaming at 6 before I was actually before I changed my plans. But yeah, I can only really go until 7 o'clock GMT, which would only give me an hour, so it's nice to have a little bit of extra time, especially if we really get into it with talking about the Silmarillion stuff that has been added since last time we were here. And yeah, that's fine. I'm always a little bit reticent when it comes to YouTube and how it sets itself up, because it is a little bit it can be a little bit weird. But anyway, now we shall just wait for a little while. Hey there, Winged. One thing that has struck me as well is the fact that when I was streaming, it was about this time last year actually, wasn't it, when I was streaming the Divide and Conquer campaigns, I was doing it during the day primarily, and this made it a lot more difficult for people on the other side of the Atlantic to be people from America and Canada primarily, but it made it a lot easier for people from places like India to tune in, which was something of a surprise to me, to know that there were actually a fair few people from India that actually watched what I was doing, which was crazy. Very, very weird. Not the sort of thing I would have expected. But, yeah. Probably not at this time of day, I would imagine. I do not think that's going to be happening. But yeah, we'll wait for a little bit longer before I actually start getting into the actual updates I have, because I do have a little bit more of an idea about how things are going to proceed over the course of the next few weeks and 3 to 4 months, which is a little bit more useful than the vagaries that I've been providing people at the end of the battle replays as of late, and also what type of videos are going to be coming out in addition to the ones that I've already been doing. So that will be good. Hey there, Kadala. Good to see you here. Yes, you're from India. Hopefully it's not too late there. The time difference being what it is would probably be... Would it be about 10 o'clock in the evening? Maybe even 11 o'clock? Which is fairly late. So you don't need to exhaust yourself too much on my accounts. But yeah, that's a name I recognise. You've been in the stream before, I believe. But yeah, this is like streaming in general is the sort of thing that I do miss doing more regularly as a part of the channel content. But that is also going to be a part of the actual updates when we get into them. 10:30 in the evening. Not terrible then. Doable on a Saturday, certainly. First stream of yours I've watched. Hello, Lycan. Well, I haven't actually done that many of them lately, so if you've arrived at the channel more recently, then that's not too surprising. I think I've only done one since I've moved here for my job. This time last year it was much more of a regular occurrence. I was doing one, sometimes two per week, and that was mainly campaign stuff, which I really am sad that I can't do at the moment, because that was good stuff. It was very fun to play Divide and Conquer for the first time in earnest, really. And is it weird that you look exactly what I thought you looked like? It is interesting actually, because a lot of people say that isn't the case. Although, to be fair, my hair is kind of out of control these days, so maybe my voice lends itself to that. But yeah, when I was streaming before, I had significantly shorter hair, and people didn't really think that I looked anything like my voice would lead you to believe, but it is what it is. I was actually a little bit worried because my camera is also a bit temperamental these days. I had to use it a couple of times for connecting to the office from home, once or twice, and it hasn't behaved itself with that, but maybe that's a software thing, because OBS would appear to be just fine. Anyway, just a little heads up about what we're going to be looking at in probably what will be the second half of this live stream. We will be able to have a look at a couple of the Silmarillion factions. Doesn't really matter what map for the time being, because there are a couple of new ones, and I believe one of them, no, that's Solengau. So yeah, this is one of them, the Horrors of Nand and Gorthav, which is another evil faction, and the other one, I believe, is the Avari. So a faction that's on the good side. The Avari, you can see there that they've got some Ent-style units as well as lightly armoured elves, and the Horrors of Nand and Gorthav are arguably the more interesting of the two factions, really, because they've got a lot of monstrous units, and they're designed to be this sort of mishmash of horrific things from the First Age. But more on that in the second half of the video, or live stream, I should say. Your mic sounds echoey? Yeah, unfortunately, I think that is a result of the acoustics of the room that I'm in, because it's not the smallest room, there's not the most on the walls to absorb noise, and it's been kind of a problem ever since I arrived here. It's the sort of thing that I can deal with a little bit more easily in edited content. It's more awkward to do that in streams like this. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but I mean, is it because of the amount of streams that I do being a little bit more, you know, the frequency of the streams is now not as high as it once was, so it's not a consistent issue. Although I would say, if you're hearing my voice twice, which I imagine you're not, if no one else has complained about that so far, but if you are hearing my voice twice, that is an issue that I know about and I can fix. So do let me know if that's the case. As soon as we get to 6 o'clock on the dot, I will start with the actual stuff that I wanted to talk about, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the Silmarillion stuff, which perhaps is a little bit more interesting than just me talking about the channel. A little bit more content focused rather than just me giving updates. Definitely echoing. Are you hearing me twice though, Dominic? You look younger than you sound. I don't think that made sense. No, I don't know. I'm assuming the next vid is a Silmarillion. Not the next one to come out, no. But I do want there to be Silmarillion content coming up within the next week, 2 weeks. You are hearing me twice. Hold on, I'll just unplug the mic and plug it back in, because that usually fixes that problem. Okay, so that may very well have fixed it. A $19 donation, that might be the biggest donation I've ever got. Thank you very much, Like an Alpha. That's very, very kind of you. Usually it's Windy who gives me a couple of donations here and there, but I don't know if he's even at home. It is fixed. Okay, thank God for that. Okay, so yeah, if it was just it was the echoing sound. I have no idea why OBS does that on startup for me, because my settings should be bang on for what we're talking about. Okay, well, as long as it's an easy fix, because the settings tab on ODS honestly frightens me. I don't want to touch any of it now that I've got it set up in this manner ever again, just so that it maintains its maintains what it is now. Anyway, we are now at 6 o'clock, so I will start talking about the updates that I have, and most of this is going to be the plans that I have running from now until about February, March time, at which point my work schedule will probably start to pick up again, I would imagine. But for the time being, because of the nature of my work, the fact that I do work on the water and it is weather dependent, naturally the winter is not the best time for taking on new work, and so generally speaking my company doesn't do that. So things ease off significantly November, December, January time especially. February is a little bit more debatable, but we shouldn't be seeing all that much in February either. What this means is I will be around a little bit more, and I won't have, especially recently when I was away for just a little over 3 weeks on the bounce, which was a problem because I actually got sent quite a bit of stuff while I was away, and quite a lot of it was Silmarillion stuff as well. All 5 of the battle replays that I was sent, however, all of which I wanted to do, are now incompatible because the update that they all depended upon has since been removed and overwritten. So I won't be able to do any of those 5, but the upshot of that is I will be able to do replays now that I'm fully up to date with the Silmarillion content they've added, including the 2 new factions we'll be going through a little bit later on, including and yeah, that should be interesting because I don't think there are going to be any more significant updates for Silmarillion for a little while, because they're going to be holding a tournament, I believe, on the current version of the game. So if you are going to be interested in that, I will be posting up a message of when that's going to be beginning. I don't know whether I will be able to cover it myself, but if I can, then I will. But if I can't, then I will at least let people know when it is, because it is the sort of thing that's worth watching if you want to keep up with the development of Silmarillion, being that it is on the most recent patch, and hopefully then I can also post a few larger set-piece battles as well on the game. You're also the 10th live stream I've watched live on YouTube out of 10 years of me watching YouTube. Well, getting live streams on YouTube is, especially if you're talking about individual channels that you want to watch, it can be a little bit difficult, especially when you're as sporadic and unreliable with live streams as I am, because because of the nature of what I do, I can't really plan in advance too far outside of the winter months that we have now. For those of you who are curious, I do work as a hydrographic surveyor, and what that means is sporadically I can be gone for weeks at a time, which is terrible for trying to maintain a YouTube channel, because consistency is what YouTube looks for. Otherwise it punishes you severely if you don't maintain constant uploads. So what I have to then do is record in massive batches so that I can, if I am suddenly whisked away for 3 weeks, all of my stuff will continue as normal while I'm gone. And that's what I had to do while I was away throughout pretty much the entirety of the latter half of September and going into October. It's also why I can't do live streaming as much anymore. It's a real pain. I really wish it wasn't the case, but it is what it is. Hopefully it's not a permanent thing, because I do intend to move on from my current position at some stage, and regardless of what I go to, it can't possibly be more difficult to run a channel whilst doing this as it would be doing something else. But again, we'll see. But like I was saying, I think what we will be doing going forward will be a little bit easier. Now, Silmarillion replays before the end of the year will be coming out, as well as the usual Reforged replays. Reforged replays tend to be easier because I tend to get them fairly consistently, and obviously I'm very comfortable with Reforged at this point. The meta hasn't changed all that much in quite a while, because obviously there hasn't been much in the way of new patches, although they are continuing to make stuff on the Reforged Discord. I don't know how visible a lot of these channels are, but I can see them. I'm not terribly active in them because I'm not actually a developer. All I can do is look at them and be nosy. But I do know that they are making stuff. It seems like it's been rumbling on forever with regards to the Reforged patch as it is. But I do know that they are working on stuff. And I do know as well that there are new factions coming in that. But I'm not the best source of information for that sort of thing because the Reforged team does tend to be a little bit more... There are more people that come and go in the Reforged team than the Silmarillion one, and also the Reforged team I believe is larger. But yes, I don't know whether the Reforged update will be coming before the end of the year. If it does, then of course I will be able to make content for it a little bit more easily than if it comes out sometime from February onwards next year. If it comes out before then I should be able to cover it as it comes, effectively. And I can be a little bit more of a contributing member to the Reforged community than I've been able to be. And I do hope that that is the case. Silmarillion, of course, I've kind of missed the updates as they've been happening, and that's why a lot of these replays have had to go in the bin, essentially, because I cannot use them now that I can't get on the same version of the game. But yeah, I think more Reforged and more Silmarillion content being released is not really the most surprising thing, but something that I have been mentioning for those of you that have stuck around to the end of Battle Replays for a little while now is Rise of Mordor. Rise of Mordor, of course, is a mod for Total War Attila. I can't imagine anyone who watches my channel is unaware of Rise of Mordor, because if you watch any of my videos you probably get Rise of Mordor content in your recommendations. I've held off on doing it for quite a while because Attila mods, especially when they're in their infancy, can be a little bit... The mechanics of them can be a little bit simplistic, and there's stuff that's very easily overpowered, and it tends to be a little bit more style over substance with that sort of thing. I mean, it's very nice style. All the mods that get made for Total War Attila tend to be really nice looking. Stuff like Medieval 1212, for example, looks fantastic. And the same is true for Rise of Mordor, but I held off on doing it for quite a while for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that Attila's mechanics, I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I can put up with them. I mean, I don't like it as much as Medieval 2, but I can get on board with the whole stylistic aspect of Rise of Mordor, and I will be starting to do bits and pieces on that. Now, the other thing is a little bit more pressing is the hardware situation that I have going on at the moment. My PC is starting to show its age, and when I show stuff, I want it to be up to the highest level of quality that I possibly can make it. The large-scale battles on Attila itself is known to be a bit of a hog on your PC. It weighs it down quite heavily. My PC being what it is, I don't know if larger-scale battle replays are going to be all that viable on it. Now, I do intend to upgrade it at some point in the early stages of next year, partly because if I do, I get a tax break from the government, because effectively my YouTube channel does count as a secondary income, and a PC is necessary for it, so I can count it weirdly as a business expense. So I have a tangible reason to upgrade my PC, and I will be doing so, but I want to start Rise of Mordor content before I do that. Now, because I'm a little bit unsure about how larger scale battle replays are going to go, I will be starting off by effectively returning to my roots and doing a combination of top 10/top 5 videos as well as faction overviews. That will be where I begin with Rise of Mordor. Now, this will serve two purposes. One, it allows me to do content without completely burning my PC to the ground, but it will also allow me to learn where the game is from a mechanical perspective before jumping into battle replays when I'm effectively completely uneducated in how the game works. So I think it's a good idea. Also, people have here and there asked me to do stuff like this, or return to doing stuff like this for a little while now, so hopefully this will also satiate those people in addition to the people that want me to do Rise of Mordor. A case of killing two birds with one stone. I would love to see you do Rise of Mordor battle replays. Well, to be fair as well, I should be able to do some battle replays on it. It might not be up to the absolute maximum that Attila can do, but I should be able to weave in a couple of battle replays as well. That is the intention anyway. It's been a long time coming. I've kind of missed the boat when it comes to Rise of Mordor being a new thing.
But I didn't want to just jump in for the hell of it. I did want to wait until... It's definitely a much more developed game now than it was even a year ago, or even 2 years ago. Rise of Mordor has been a thing for quite a while. And yeah, I think that now is a good time to start doing it. So you can expect to see, I would suggest, Rise of Mordor stuff start to appear. A few... Probably start with a couple of top 10/top 5 videos, which, to be fair, shouldn't be that difficult to make, because Attila, while I do have my reservations about it mechanically, it is a lot easier to understand when it comes to picking what units are better than others. That will probably be where I start off with, going into a few faction overviews as well, and then moving into next year, sort of past the new year, hopefully we can start to see a few larger scale battle replays on it as well. So that's a loose plan with regards to that, and that will be it'll be the first genuinely new content that I've put on my channel since Silmarillion was first a thing, which at this stage we're getting on for 2 years, I believe, since Silmarillion, the very first version of Silmarillion, where there was only really a couple of factions like the Sons of Feanor in the game. It's come quite a ways since then, I'm sure you would agree. But yeah, Rise of Mordor will be arriving fairly soon. The PC issue is something which I have noted. Now, it's only really become a problem in the Medieval 2 stuff, weirdly on a very specific map, being Moria. Anyone who's seen the last channel update, which was a pre-record, will note that, weirdly enough, it doesn't like that map. It's really, really bizarre. I don't quite know why that specific map would cause my PC not just to crash the desktop, but to reboot. It's a really strange issue. I would be worried if it was happening more often on other maps. I think at that stage I would kind of need to bring forward my plans to buy stuff, which it's not ideal. But I think it'll be fine. For the next 2 to 3 months my PC will be able to limp on, I think, and then we'll be back in the realms of having actually some good hardware. And then we'll move forward as we will. Once we get the new PC as well, hopefully I'll start to maybe introduce some modded Bannerlord stuff as well here and there, although I really do believe that Bannerlord would be better suited to a streaming format like this, and then it would start to clash with my work again, especially if I was looking to start doing that moving into the spring. But that's something which I won't commit to just yet, because I can't really be sure about it. But Rise of Mordor is something that I can commit to, and you can expect to start seeing that towards the tail end of November. Maybe sort of a week before the end of November, I would say, is about where I would say, because based on the replays I've already recorded, it takes me up to just past the halfway point of November, and I've still got a couple more as well to do. That's something else I can talk about as well, the upcoming schedule, of which the next battle replay, which will be coming out in the middle of next week, will be an Eclipse scenario. There's quite a few scenarios, actually, 2 of which are going to be from him. It's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be the Númenóreans effectively invading the coast of Eriador. I've kind of chosen Erin Vaughan as the location because it was the one woodland that the Númenóreans didn't completely cut down in that part of the world. There's another one coming from him as well, which is going to be Isengard marching on a more wilderness-based Arthedain, so we're going to be seeing quite a lot of Dunedain. So the Dunedain against the Uruk-hai. It's a large-scale battle, that one as well, probably the larger of the 2, I would suggest, given the number of units that are on the field. That'll be an interesting one. Episodic series coming up as well, based around, 3 battles in a row essentially, based around the ancient grudge that the dwarves and the elves hold for one another. Mainly from the dwarves though. And each of them will also have a human ally as well. Narratively, the dwarves will be taking up with the Easterlings, and Mirkwood will be reliant upon Dale to come to their aid. But that is what's going to be coming up more in the next few weeks. And I think that's just about it. I think there is actually another replay as well that I'm forgetting. I believe there was one siege battle that Master Blaster sent me as well, which that will be probably actually the one that I follow up the next Eclipse siege with. So a few replays to get on with. That will be what's coming out from a Reforged perspective. Like I said, I would have liked to have done the Silmarillion ones as well. There were 5 that people sent me, and all 5 of them are now incompatible with the Silmarillion files that are available to me. I thought I would be able to update to the point where they sent it to me, and that would work. But like I said, I think it was Stewie who posted that update file in the test build section of the Silmarillion Discord, and he removed it because J-Monster then sent forward the files for this version of the game, which has the 2 new factions in it. It is what it is. It's unfortunate, but yeah. Anyway, I think that's mostly what I wanted to talk about with regards to my plans moving forward. I think we will have a large interlude here where we will actually look at the Silmarillion content, so that I'm not just waffling into the camera and we can actually see something on the battlefield. So let's go ahead and have a look. Now, this will be a little bit of a learning experience for me as well, because while I did watch J-Monster stream in parts, it was well, this is going to be me effectively looking through the where is the grassy plains? Are they here? Or have they given it a new name? Is that it? I know that I think Talath Dianin is a, yeah, that's a map that we've seen before. That one will do for our purposes here. We will start off, I believe, with the Avari. But yeah, I have watched this and I do know what each faction's focus is intended to be. But yeah, and then all of the elves as well. They do have they have a similar feeling, these guys, the Avari, to the wood elves over in Warhammer Total War, or Total Warhammer, in that they have the tree units, they have lightly armoured elves around them as well. They're obviously a skirmish-based faction, the Avari, but maybe not in the way that you would expect. I don't know. Oh, yeah. Whoops. This is the problem with having a completely new... There it is. Okay. I do like the UI on Silmarillion though. It just becomes a little bit... makes me feel like a bit of a fool when I don't know where stuff is. But yes, the Avari. A little bit more in my element talking about the game rather than myself and my channel. At any rate, let's organise them into the tree units over here. So they do have what could be classified as monstrous units by the standards here, but... Right. Okay. And let's pause the game as well. Now, the Avari are intended to be another faction that are more lightly armoured. When it comes to, when you compare them to a lot of the other elves, obviously for Narfin, especially Feanor, there have been quite a few heavily armoured factions that have been added into Silmarillion, and I know that they didn't want to go too far down the road of making that ubiquitous across all factions. I think they've succeeded in making a faction which is certainly not too focused around heavy armour and that sort of thing with this one though. Obviously they have their Entish units, which are going to be a little bit more tanky when it comes to that sort of thing, but the Elven units are certainly a little bit more fragile. So we'll be going through this. We won't be going too in depth here because J-Monster has already done that, and he's certainly a better person to talk to about the intricacies of the Silmarillion balance than I am, because he's a developer and the lead developer at that, so he ultimately chooses what direction the game takes. Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth, though, is probably the single most significant unit in terms of its presence on the field that the Avari have. Now, single entity units are maybe something of a debated thing. I don't know how people feel about this, but it is something that Silmarillion have made work with Sauron, and they have got these single entity units here and there, not in every faction, but they do in the Avari. And the Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth, the idea behind him is, for those of you who are familiar with the movie, The Two Towers, which I'm sure all of you are, the Ents were throwing boulders in that movie. That is essentially what the Grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth is. He's meant to be a living artillery piece. I'm not entirely certain about what this gentleman riding him is all about. He looks a little bit... I mean, if you look closer, he's got a little bit of the Joker going on with regards to his colour scheme. But a living artillery piece is an interesting one because most artillery is very, very weak when it gets exposed in melee, when it gets charged by cavalry. That's not going to be the case with something like this. You're going to have to send something pretty substantial to kill it off. It brings forth some interesting challenges, but it also means that it's only a single entity unit. Once you isolate it, any single entity is ultimately going to pay the price. Sauron does, and I'm sure that the Grandfather of Deepwood Hearth will as well, but it's interesting. Now, another skirmisher unit are the Thorncasters, and they are... If you remember the Scouts of the Tree from Gondolin, the Slingers, they have very low base missile damage at 2, but they are armour piercing, and that is the unit that I would compare them to most of all. They're going to be the sort of thing which individual volleys are not going to do the most damage, but if you leave them be over time, they will start chipping down anything with that armor-piercing damage, so you can't really afford to leave them alone. And that is really what typifies the Avari. They aren't skirmish heavy in the sense that normal elven factions are. They are very much an ambushy style faction, and a lot of their skirmish power actually comes from their throwing projectiles and stuff like this. This maybe brings them more into line with a faction like the House of Haleth, the Haladin, in the sense that if you can expose them, if you get them into an open field and you know where they are and you can pin down their skirmishers, they're going to struggle a lot. But if the Avari can keep the initiative, if they can keep a lot of their units hidden, if you can play your skirmish game correctly, they can be I imagine they can be an incredibly annoying faction to face off against, and you'll find your army getting chipped down over time. We also have these guys over here, another Entish unit. They look a little bit monstrous, if I do say so myself, the Thorned Ancients. But it's neat to see that the Ents aren't just like, because the Ents have got almost like a drawn-on smiley face in most other variants that we see them in, because the Entish model remains the same in any other Total War thing. But yeah, the Thorned Ancients, they actually don't have the biggest amount of damage for a unit like this, nor do they have the most armor, considering that they are a unit akin to the Trolls, where if you plow into enemy lines, they're going to get exposed. Well, they're going to get surrounded, and that means their melee defense is going to be effectively useless. But that's pretty low as well. What really gives them their usefulness on the field is the fact they have 8 hit points, and considering the relative fragility of a lot of the other Avari units, considering their lower armor, this is the sort of thing which the Avari will find really, really useful. 8 hit points is a lot to chew your way through. But you could effectively look at them, I think, as a more defensive variant of the Trolls. Let's have a little look and see if I'm not missing anything. I would love to... my dude's a cutie? Are you referring to the grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth, or me? Either way. Questionable taste, either way, I would suggest. Your enemy's friend, happy Halloween. Happy Halloween to you as well. New UI is cool, but I have the old UI down to muscle memory. Yeah, that's very much true for me with how much I've been playing Medieval 2. Sauron is hard to take down if he's constantly mobile. Yes, that's true. High mass units can be difficult. If you're up against someone who really knows what they're doing with a high mass unit, it can be a nightmare. As I have learnt, I remember there was this one particular game where I was playing as the House of Fingolfin on the defence, and it was a real problem to try and stop the Uraloki from just running over our lines, and in the end, we failed. We lost. We lost the game. But it is what it is. Let's go back to one of the problems that I do have is the fact that when I'm actually tabbed in and looking at the thing, I don't have a second screen anymore, so I can't actually see the chat because I'm full screen on this. So apologies if I do take a little while to respond to you, but I will. I'll get there. Now then, we have these guys. They look quite scary, actually, the Avari, when you look through their units. They definitely look significantly more savage than many of the other forces that you would note. The Stonehewers of Darkling Woods. Now, with more basic units of infantry, you can draw a lot more from just looking at the stats and having a look at some of their bonuses, rather than more monstrous units where their usefulness in battle can vary quite greatly. The Trolls are pretty much the barometer to look at that by. But the Stonehewers, they are single-handed axemen with shields, so they're not armor-piercing, but they do have a pretty healthy attack here of 7, and also their charge bonus, which is 9. Now this is really good. This is going to make them really effective against more lightly armoured units at dealing damage. One problem is, however, the same problem exists for them. They don't have the highest amount of armour. I mean, look at that. For the Avari in general are the sort of units which you're not going to want to leave them in an open field. You're not going to want to tackle factions head on in a straight up grind fest, generally speaking. If you're up against someone like the Haladin and other such lightweight factions, it becomes a little bit more of a questionable thing, because you're both good at the same things. So if one of you takes the initiative and is a little bit more forthright in your desire to be aggressive and straight up, maybe that's the difference maker between you. But if you're up against someone like Finarfin or Feanor or any of the heavily armoured elven factions, or perhaps someone like Angband, who is very well known for their armour, you're going to struggle a bit more, certainly. But yeah, high damage unit, single-handed axeman, pretty much a classic example of the type. Moving on, a unit that can hide, which is certainly the sort of thing which you're going to want to rely upon if you are the Avari. We have the Gloom Hunters of the Trackless Dark. That is an incredibly edgy name, isn't it? But perhaps it's fitting for a faction that dresses in the way that they do. So yeah, they are glaive infantry, maybe a little bit similar to something like the Nandor Glade Guard over in Reforged. In fact, that might not be the worst comparison. They don't have, maybe a little bit less focused around the charge there. They could hide anywhere, bonus against cavalry, effective against armour, so very much a damage focused unit this. They're going to be able to deal damage pretty much against any foe they come up against. Their defensive skill is also very good as well, actually, so maybe you could see them as a bit of a confluence of heavy swordsmen and heavy axemen here. Now, I'm talking about them. They do damage against pretty much every target, good melee defense, very good attack. Pretty expensive at 950, but you'd expect that given what they're good against. But again, their main weakness is going to be they are unshielded, and ultimately they've got very, very low armor as well. So if you're exposed in broad daylight and you start getting shot up by arrows, you're going to have a bad day. The combat bonus in woods as well, which terrain bonuses are important in Silmarillion, that is worth bearing in mind. And if you are playing as the Avari, chances are you're going to be sticking to the trees. So this unit may be more effective than the stats would let on in a lot of situations. Now then, another unit that can hide. Again, they look pretty sinister with these masks on. But we have the Branch Stalkers of the Green Sea. They have a missile attack of 10. Ammunition... Where is the ammunition? Doesn't tell us the ammunition. That's something that we'd have to look at in the army selection phase. Very much an assassin-esque looking unit, this. They're actually pretty good in melee by the looks of the stats here. They're very expensive as well at 960. The difference between them and the unit next to them is that while they are good in melee, they don't have the bonus against cavalry or the armor piercing that the other unit has. But they do have a missile attack. A missile attack which I do not believe is effective against armor, but with a base damage of 10, that's very, very significant, to be honest with you. As long as you hit the right kind of target, you're going to do an awful lot of damage with this sort of unit. And these two green-clad units are going to be very important for what the Avari do, because they don't have to have trees to hide in, and given that you are one of these ambush-style factions, you're going to need to rely on that sort of thing. Here, once again, an example of the Avari not having the armor crafting expertise that perhaps some of their distant cousins have, given the fact that they are quite literally using sharpened wooden sticks and bits of bark for their shields. The bow wards of the Darkling Woods. Again, the Darkling Woods seem to be... I mean, they look kind of grey-skinned. They look very, very almost demonic, really. Or undead would perhaps be a better thing to describe them as. They look like fairly basic spears. They've got really good total defense. Actually, most of that, however, is coming down to defensive skill. Their armor is very poor. The shields will help them somewhat, but again, they're not the sort of unit which you're going to want to leave exposed too much. But yeah, fairly typical as far as spears go. Bonus fighting cavalry, all of that good stuff. Here we have a two-handed spear unit, the Host of the Withered Ash. That is a huge amount of florins that you're putting down for them, 1,050. But they can form phalanx, and that Silmarillion, a phalanx formation is certainly not as ubiquitous as it is in Reforged. If you have a unit like this, it can be a real boon for you, because if you, as I always say, if you have one of these units and it gets into the late game, you've put yourself in a really, really good position, honestly, to go on to win that fight. Attack of 9, total defense of 20. Again, it's very much a theme along the Avari units. Defensive skill is going to be really, really good. Armour is going to be lagging behind, and this means that you're not going to want to get bogged down in a ground war too much. You're going to want to outmaneuver your opponent, and if you can do so, moving into the late game especially, that's where defensive skill can become really, really difficult to take on, especially if it's attached to a phalanx as well. But yeah, two-handed spears, they're not going to be pikes, so that is worth bearing in mind. Pikemen will be able to outrange them, so do keep that in your head. The Moss Stalkers of the Darkling Woods, man, that is an old model for the Morroquendi there, but this is the sort of thing which will of course be updated as we move along. So they aren't completely without archers, are the Avari, and having a look at this, missile attack of 5, total defense of 11, cost of 680. They can use sharpened stakes. Hide in long grass is an interesting one. I don't know how many maps utilise the long grass terrain type, but yeah, I mean, a light archer, even with a unit like this, you're not going to want to get bogged down in a skirmish fight with other factions, generally speaking. Again, you're going to want to play that hit and run style. And this is the kind of unit which they're not that expensive. Like, if you do get caught in a skirmish fight and you need to cover your retreat, they can do that. But more often than not, you're going to want to do damage with them rather than try and have them take damage. Now then, Shades of the Guarded Path. This unit puts me in mind of the Maithern and Tolgalen over in Assyriand, in the sense that they are certainly an upper end unit of infantry, around the same sort of cost as well. more, well, I mean, even here though, the armour of 6 isn't that much. They have a better shield value at the very least, so they will be able to withstand a little bit more punishment as long as their shields are pointing in the right direction from archers. But what really sets these guys apart, honestly, 15 with a charge bonus of 14 is an incredible amount of base damage. I mean, if you're going up against anything that doesn't have a good deal of armour to block any of this damage, you're going to rip through units. So especially against factions like Tol and Galhoth, and actually the new faction that's been added, Nand and Gorthav, you're going to be able to do an awful lot of damage here. And also this is an upper end unit of infantry that you can bring to the field, so they're still going to do pretty well against other units of infantry, but still. And then over here, the final 2 units, we have the Rangers of the Hidden Path. I do believe, actually, if I'm not mistaken, there may be another body-piercing projectile that's been added, but it might be for Nand and Gorthav. But it is worth bearing in mind that one of these units may have it. Now, I don't think it's the Rangers, because for a start they're a Javelin unit. Body-piercing Javelins can be added, though. We've seen it with the Demons of the Desert. Quite a high recruitment cost at 980, but a missile attack of 10, total defense of 25. They've got a huge amount of defensive skill, but again, they get caught out in the open by archers, armour of 4, shield of 0. It is what it is. They are incredibly damaging, but incredibly fragile, as we've seen with pretty much everything the Avari have so far. And finally, we have the first Refusers, the most expensive unit outside of the Ents that we've seen so far. You can hide anywhere, which is obviously useful for this faction. Effective against armour is an interesting one. It looks like they have a sling, so this very much akin to the Scouts of the Tree. Missile attack of 2 that is effective against armour. But I would imagine what really sets these guys apart is how good they are in melee as well. I mean, 12 attack, total defense of 26. Their armour is actually pretty good considering a lot of the other units. Defensive skill of 17. But yeah, I mean, I've actually noticed as well a fair amount of Elder Scrolls style armour here, because I believe that's a Bosmer armour set, and I think we saw over there in the, what were they called again, the Shades of the Guarded Path, I think this is like a Stormcloak armour set from Skyrim that's been slightly edited, so that's interesting to see. But yeah, we'll exit there and we'll have a little look at the chat again before moving on to Nand and Gorthav as well. Obviously, if you want a slightly more educated view on all of this, J-Monster would be the one to talk to. Hey there, Calvin. Where's the beard? It's gone. Part of the reason for that is when I'm on site on the boats, essentially, it's very, very easy to start looking really, really scruffy. And eventually you just want to get rid of it. And so I did while I was away. The Glaives Trackless Dark is also relentless with AP, don't quote me on that. Is this a channel update? Yes, Beastie. The first part of the video was that. I'm also going through the new factions that have been added to Silmarillion, because it gives a little bit more of the content that people perhaps know me for a little bit better, talking about the game rather than myself. But effectively, to give a Cliff Notes version of the updates, Rise of Mordor content will start to filter in the latter part of November. I'll be continuing with Silmarillion and Reforged as well, and also I'll be getting new hardware at the start of next year, so we can start, because my PC is slowly degrading in the performance it's giving me. But it is what it is. This faction is expensive, honestly. Yeah, I mean, most Elven factions are going to be. It is worth mentioning as well that the Avari will not be playable in campaign. They will be a faction that's on the map, but you won't be able to play as them. And the same is true of Nand and Gorthav. I think the idea behind both of these factions initially was just to have the unit, so they would effectively be in the Rebels faction, but based on where they were geographically, it would change, so that it wasn't just like bandits essentially all over the map. Even if you were like in the heart of Angband, you would have a random castle that was full of bandits. So I think that was the idea. That then morphed into them being non-playable factions in campaign, which has in turn morphed into them also being available for selection in multiplayer. I think that was also the case for Valinor, if I'm not mistaken. I think Valinor also started off as in the same vein, so both of these two factions had that. My PC is a bit ahead of yours. I dare not try multiplayer anymore. Well, I mean, multiplayer is not too bad because you can turn the settings right down, and at that point, even really old hardware can run Medieval 2, and it won't be a problem with the game at that point. It'll be a problem with like internet connection and that sort of thing, which is a more common reason for people crashing in Medieval 2, and it always has been really over the course of the development of both Reforged and Silmarillion as well, I assume, although I don't believe I've ever crashed in a Silmarillion Total War game where the issue wasn't down to something intrinsic to the map that was created. I believe that's true. I may be lying there, or just completely ignorant to what's happened in the past, but I don't remember it. I remember it happening in Reforged a few times, but Reforged has been around significantly longer. So yeah, that was the Avari, and now we shall move on to the horrors of Nand and Gorthav, which honestly, I really like the idea of this faction. I really do. Because I think there's plenty of elven factions in the game. There's obviously plenty of men in the game at this point as well, but part of the issue is if you want, like, the orcish factions, like, there was only 2 in the game before Nand and Gorthav, and you could even say that Nand and Gorthav is actually really more of a monster faction than an orcish one, but more on that in just a moment. First of all, I mean, this is going to be a faction that has a few expensive units in it as well, because as I'm sure you can see from the little side area here, there are a lot of monsters, including the return of spiders. So that's going to be a real theme here. We've got the Urush Abomination as well. So how best to organise this? I think we'll have this big lad on his own, because this is another single entity unit in effect. Then we'll have all of the spiders. I think this is a single entity unit as well, so this is a little bit different. Nand and Gorthav, being a monster focused faction, do have more than one single entity unit, but also very akin to the Avari. They are not really going to be the strongest faction in a straight up fight. Right then, I believe that's everything. We move on. I really like some of these loading screens that Silmarillion have added as well. It really makes use of some of the really nice artwork that people have made for Lord of the Rings. Okay, now then, I believe a bit of a disclaimer. I think the Urush Abomination, his texture is not quite right at the moment, but such is the way of things. We'll try and separate these guys out a little bit more so, because things are a little bit different with Nand and Gorthav. There's a little bit more in the way of. And then I guess we'll put the infantry at the front. Not a huge amount of infantry that they have, but we'll go through. I guess we'll just go through them in the order that I've got them here. So very similar. You can see there that they've got the Angmar general from Reforged in this guy's head at the moment. But I believe again that is a result of the texture not being quite right, and I'm sure that will be fixed at some stage. But yeah, the Urush Abomination. There's actually not too much to talk about with the Urush Abomination, because he's very similar to the grandfather over in the Avari. He's effectively a living artillery piece. He'll throw fiery chunks at the enemy. I think they work a little bit differently though. I think they're a little bit more intended for use against light infantry, because it's intended, I think, to be a little bit more similar to the Uraloki, where the flaming damage is better against more unprotected units. But I think as well it has a knockdown effect similar to the Silverthorn arrows. So even if it doesn't really matter how much armour you pack on, if you get hit, you're going to get disrupted by this thing, and it will make advancing towards Nand and Gorthav pretty awkward, which, considering they are an ambush-style faction as well, or at least certainly more of a ranged-focused, skirmishy, hit-and-run style faction, that's going to be really useful, potentially. The ammunition might be a little bit more in question, like you won't be able to do that across the entirety of the battle, but again, strengths and weaknesses. I think what J-Monster, the way he described it as well, is like he intended for this to be the sort of unit where the projectiles were actually bits of itself that it was tearing off and then throwing towards the enemy, which is not the sort of thing you can really do with Medieval 2 and how it works, but it's still a really neat concept. Obviously as well in melee, as any single entity unit is going to be, it has to be really strong in melee, because otherwise it's going to get killed really quickly. And the same sort of thing applies here as it would to Sauron or any monstrous unit that's a single entity. Speaking of which, we also have the Hungering Maw, which is a green spider. This is much more of a melee unit, obviously, although, well, I say that, is it? Does it? I mean, it spits stuff at the enemy, clearly. Special attack, expert at hiding in woods. I'm not sure why you'd want to hide with something like, well, I mean, I suppose it makes sense that it can hide, even though it's massive because it's green, but yeah. Bonus fighting cavalry, of course it frightens nearby enemy infantry. I hope none of you have got arachnophobia. I know that it's a spider in Medieval 2, so it's maybe not a photorealistic spider, but still, people who don't like spiders may wish to step out for a little while, I suppose. Very expensive. I mean, total defense of 48. That's incredibly high, as you would expect from a single entity unit. I guess this is the key to Nand and Gorthav, though, because even when you run out of ammunition later on, these are the kind of units which are going to be really, really difficult to take down, especially when the enemy army is going to be a little bit punch drunk. And that's a good time, actually, to talk about Nand and Gorthav being perhaps the first outright skirmish-focused Orcish faction we've seen, because they are intended to be able to go toe-to-toe at long range with pretty much any other faction. They'll do so in their own way, of course. They're not going to do so through heavy armour and the like. They're going to do so through numbers with their foot archers, and also through monstrous units, which are going to be much more difficult to take down in a traditional sense from stuff like archers. The Karangwi Broodmother, bonus fighting cavalry, missile attack of 4. I believe they're armour-piercing javelins, which perhaps the best unit to compare them to would be the Beasts of Gorgoroth, only I have a little bit more faith in Silmarillion as it stands, with monstrous units being more useful than over in Reforged. I mean, Reforged hasn't had an update in a while, so they haven't had a chance to really address it. But think of them as a useful Beasts of Gorgoroth, I suppose. That's a gross simplification of what they do, I'm sure. But again, if you want better details, J-Monster really is the person to go to. We have smaller spiders as well. The Karangwi Hunters, again, they've got bows this time around, so bow cavalry. Only 25 of them, but they do have 3 hit points. This is a very unique horse archer in this sense, because having 3 hit points on a unit of horse archers means you can leave them in the sort of situations where they're getting shot up, maybe a little bit more so than you could with regular horse archers. It is worth bearing in mind, however, like most of the things for Nand and Gorthav, much like the Avari, their armour values are really quite low, lower even than the Avari in many cases. Not too surprising from a numbers-focused Orcish faction, perhaps. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of unit. They perhaps have a similar sort of thing going on as maybe the Bjornings over in Reforged, that they get all their survivability from their hit points. Once those are gone, it becomes a little bit more dicey to keep them in that sort of fight. I mean, these are relatively small units. Let's get it right here. The Karangwi Blood Gorgers as well. Very expensive at 5 hit points again. They could be a real menace when it comes to the cavalry game, because while they can be relatively easily outnumbered, the individual hardiness of a lot of these spiders makes them quite difficult to take on. It's another similarity, I suppose, they have with their fellow light Orcish faction in Tollingawahoth, although Tollingawahoth may be a little bit more traditional with their cavalry, sort of either heavily numerous or anti-cavalry bonuses, that sort of thing. This unit has a bonus fighting cavalry. I mean, they're pretty much just a really strong unit of cavalry, which are going to be hunting down other units of cav on the field. They have a crude weapon, apparently. Huge numbers on these stats, though, as you'd expect from a unit that only has 12 models and has, that cost. 5 hit points is a lot, though. Be really interested to see how they get on against some of the heavy cavalry from the likes of Feanor. Karangwi Hunters, is this the unit? Nope. This is the unit over here. So the Karangwi Hunters are, I guess... Wait a minute. We have 2 units of Karangwi Hunters. That's a little bit strange. But yeah, Karangwi Hunters we've already spoken about. I don't know why I guess they're duplicated on the list then. But anyway, we have the Duso Manuthan Hunting Pack, which rounds off the fast-moving cavalry side of the monsters that Nand and Gorthav are able to bring. Duso Manuthan Hunting Pack, just having a look at them, they can hide in the long grass. Combat bonus in woods or snow is an interesting combination. Huge charge bonus on them though, 14, which is perhaps an idea of what they're intended to be. They are, the fill-in perhaps for a more traditional unit of shock cavalry, where you get a lot of impact from the number of units that are in the unit. You have 14 charge bonus. The defense is obviously not that high, but they also have a second hit points. They do have a little bit of longevity about them. A unit with 2 HP as well, which honestly doesn't have a very high recruitment cost. They're going to be useful, especially in the early stages of the battle. Like when you decide to commit them, you have to be under no false pretenses that they're going to fall away as the battle goes on, but it's all about getting those really nice charges with them. And yeah, interesting kind of thing, especially when you consider that Silmarillion doesn't really have the same number of multiple HP units that Reforged has. To have so many multiple HP units as Nand and Gorthav is very significant, but it's also very necessary given a lot of their heavy hitters are very small units indeed, and horrific units at that. The Devourers of Children is perhaps a little bit on the nose as far as the name goes, and they look like something. It escapes me. Is it like there's a troll? Maybe it's a D&D troll or something like that, but yeah, they kind of look like that. They've got these gaping mouths. It's really quite strange, but yeah, 1,000 is a fairly high amount of cost again, but an attack of 20, a charge bonus of 30, that's a huge amount of damage they can do right off the bat. 8 hit points as well, but much like the other units we've already seen from Nand and Gorthav, as soon as those hit points are gone, they'll fall away pretty quickly. They can't hide either, so that is a mark against them, considering how Nand and Gorthav will generally want to go unnoticed for as long as they can in a battle. Frightened nearby enemy infantry, completely unsurprising. Another fear-focused faction as well will Nand and Gorthav be, considering what they are. And then we have another insectoid-looking unit. I think they're actually slightly in the floor here, but they are hiding. They can hide anywhere. The Karangui Gore Swarm, that's a rather gnarly title. They're very cheap, so they're effectively the trash of the... although trash, I think, is maybe not the... is maybe a little bit... undersells them a bit. Chaff, maybe the best way to describe them. I don't know. But either way, they've bonus fighting cavalry, combat bonuses, so really anything that isn't really heavily armoured infantry can actually take a surprising amount of damage to a unit that only costs 275 when you look at this, an attack of 8, total defence of 9, but they're going to die pretty quickly, which is perhaps for the best because no one likes a bunch of supersized cockroaches charging towards them, 200 of which. Now then, we shall move into the baseline for any army, which is going to be their foot-based units, of course, the Duso Manuthan units, which I think they're intended to be outcasted orcs, which are sort of hybrids of some men and orcs, that sort of thing. It doesn't pay to think too closely about that sort of thing. But yeah, melee attack, 8 sort of things that you would expect. Low stats, considering that they are ultimately an archer unit, but missile attack of 5 is pretty decent for a unit that only costs 630, is fairly numerous. Like I said, Nand and Gorthav are intended to be a faction which can really go toe-to-toe with anyone at range as long as you play to their strengths. Obviously, they're not going to be able to outlast some of the heavier archers from the likes of Gondolin, but they can go about business in their own way, and this is always going to be a factor of them. They've got a bonus fighting cavalry as well, which is interesting. The Duso Manuthan Flesh Feasters, they've got a very heavy metal naming convention, don't they? This is the heaviest unit that the Duso Manuthan can field on foot. 1,150 is a fairly high cost, but these stats are a little bit more like it. I mean, they have an armour of 10, which is certainly more than anything else in the roster will have outside their single entity models. Attack of 18, huge charge bonus of 24, decent defensive skill as well, but it is worth saying, no multiple HP. Any multiple HP units are going to be the monstrous ones, so this could be the sort of thing, again, that you could compare a little bit more to stuff like the Sons of Ulfang from the Easterlings, where they are a bodyguard unit, but they don't have that second hit point. Moving on, we have the Duso Manuthan Flesh Tearers, which are going to be the line infantry unit of Nand and Gorthav. Now, as line infantry, they are going to be outclassed by a lot of other factions when you consider their stats. I mean, their shield will help them somewhat from the front, but their armour is very low. Their attack is okay for what they are. 705, though, is a fair amount of cost to shell out for a unit like this, because I always look at line infantry. How good they are defensively is a big part of what makes a good line infantry unit what it is. Now, admittedly, Nand and Gorthav are rarely going to give you the opportunity, I think, to get into that tit-for-tat kind of battle with them if they're being played correctly, but if you do have no choice but to engage in that sort of line fight with another faction's Nand and Gorthav, I feel as though the Flesh Tearers, while they can do a decent amount of damage to lightly armoured units, if you come up against like the big boys in terms of armour, you're going to struggle. There are quite a lot of similarities actually between these two new factions that have been added. They're good at similar things, not exactly the same. More monstrous and long range this from Nand and Gorthav, maybe a little bit more close range punch from the Avari. Duso Manuthan Predators, missile attack of 2, but that's going to be effective against armour. So armour piercing javelins, again, more of that ability to skirmish with the enemy, because skirmishing with javelins is something that happens in Silmarillion more often, because a lot of factions have access to them. Some of the javelins are intended to be that more back and forth kind of unit. This, with the armour piercing being involved, you're going to want to target units properly, but still. And finally, we have the Duso Manuthan Skull Splitters, which are going to be a throwing axe unit. Really high base damage on these guys. Throwing axes, of course, are always going to have that high base damage. Other than that, though, pretty much the same sort of thing. A charge bonus of 20 is an interesting choice, because it means once they're out of ammunition, they can actually charge in and do a fair amount of damage initially before their abysmal defensive stats means that they melt to just about anything. And also, if enemy archers get a hold of them, they're going to die before they can even do that. But still, it's all about how you use units like this, and lightly armoured hit-and-run factions are not to everyone's taste, so not everyone will enjoy playing as Nand and Gorthav or as the Avari, but they are still very important to have in the game. Like, you don't want to devolve every fight into just a line battle or skirmishing between archers. And I'll be interested to see these two in action, to be honest, because these hit-and-run style factions, when they're played correctly, it can look masterful in the right hands, it can look absolutely disastrous in the wrong hands. which would include mine. So, those are the two factions. Again, I would say if you want a more rounded view on those two, I would really recommend you watch J Monster's video, because he goes into far more detail than I will, or have done. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to see those two new factions in motion within the next 2 weeks or so. Hopefully, I will need actually a replay of that. But considering there's a tournament upcoming, if I can, I will help cover that. But we shall have to wait and see. Hello, Nerd. Hello, Lango. I sure do not enjoy it, but thank God I can busy myself counting pixels. I don't know what you're on about there, but hello. Good to see you again. Rogue. They come from Botep Warhammer. Yeah, that's worth mentioning as well. A lot of these new models have got have been taken from Botep, which they've got a lot of new, like that team in general. Like I haven't covered Botep at all, but that team in general, they've made a lot of really cool animations, a lot of really cool models, and Silmarillion is collaborating with them on a lot of stuff, which can only be a good thing, because it means that the workload is shared a little bit, and you can be mutually benefited by that. Hello, Lord Heckle Smosh, the Devourers of the Children. That is, yeah, I know that that's where they came from, but there's something that they remind me of, and I'm sure it's a D&D troll. It might not be the most recent. It might not be 5th edition D&D, but I feel as though there's a troll in D&D that has that sort of the really extended lower jaw, the like large mouth, like the sort of Neanderthal look, but pumped up essentially. It might be that, but I might be thinking of something else. I'm sure I've seen it before, that sort of design before now. I'm sure. But yes, that was cool. I think actually I've spent more time on the Silmarillion stuff than I have actually on the channel update, which is interesting. Maybe I should go back once this is uploaded and change the name so that it includes that, because it is where I'm at my most comfortable, to be fair. Talking about the game as it is, but yeah. As for anything else that I was going to mention, I think actually I covered most of what I wanted to cover earlier on in the stream, to be honest. But just to summarise here for anyone who's just recently joined, Rise of Mordor content is the main thing that I wanted to get across, really, and that will be starting to filter in towards the tail end of November. As I've said, we'll be starting off with probably top 10s and top 5s of units, and then moving into faction overviews, and hopefully by then I'll have my new hardware, and I can also then start doing large-scale battle replays on Rise of Mordor, because as I also mentioned, I do believe my PC it's not dying, but it's certainly showing signs of wear and tear in its age. So it's about time that I basically made wholesale changes, a complete upgrade, if you will. So yeah. Kroger X, how long until the game will be ready? I mean campaign map, etc. I know that they're working more on campaign now. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the dwarves are the only faction left to be added. I think. But yeah, that is something to keep an eye on. I think that as soon as the dwarves are in, then all that really remains is developing the campaign and fine-tuning, which obviously is in essence an unending process, the fine-tuning. As we've learnt with Reforged, it can be a long thing that just keeps rolling on and on and on. But as soon as you have the base there and you can start playing it, it doesn't really matter too much. As for when the campaign's actually coming, developing a campaign does take a lot of time, but they have been working on it. I know they've been working on it. J Monster will reveal information as and when the team are ready to do so, is what I would say to that, because you don't want to overpromise too early, otherwise it can be you can get into trouble by doing that. If you say yes, we will release here, and then you suddenly realise actually we can't release then because it'll be rubbish, everything will be broken, then people will start getting antsy. But yeah, I think that the Silmarillion campaign has got a huge amount of potential, because they've got a lot of stuff that they want to do with it, and it should be really fun to play. And there's a lot of detailed factions. Like I said as well, the Avari and Nand and Gorthav, you can play them in multiplayer, but they are a non-playable faction, essentially. They'll just be on the map, and it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting, that sort of thing. J Monster mentioned something about mountain elves being added. Not sure about the name of the faction. That'd be interesting. I mean, I've not heard. I don't know how much lore there is about mountain elves in the Silmarillion, but I mean, if there's enough to go on to make a faction there, then fair enough. But yeah, I think if that's true, then that'll be something else. I'm sure if that's true, I would imagine that's something someone in the development team has latched onto and wants to make it, and you know, everyone wants a creative outlet. And as we've already seen with Silmarillion and just modding in general, it can lead to some really impressive things. But yeah, I would say that. Yeah, and other than that, I do hope as well, something in the more immediate future before the end of the year, I do want to show off more of Silmarillion, because now that they've gone through this fairly intensive process, I think there's been 8 updates for Silmarillion in the past couple of weeks, as they fine-tuned this one with the 2 new factions. I really want to show off a bit of Silmarillion if I can. So if that is at all possible, then I will do so. But I will need a replay, a suitable replay as well, to do that. Last time, obviously, sort of back towards the tail end of the summer when Valinor were added, that was also really, really cool, and hopefully we can do the same for the Avari and for Nand and Gorthav as well. I'm really interested to see what Nand and Gorthav are like to play as, because they're being so monster heavy and having that skirmish focus, but small units because of them being monstrous and having so many multiple HP units, but all of it is very, very different, and making it work with the rest of the factions is very difficult. They've managed to make it work with monstrous units in Silmarillion, though. It's a very difficult task, because you either, in the past, it was always you made them completely overpowered or they were useless, effectively. The only thing that truly worked was trolls, and even then they could be a bit underwhelming, at least in multiplayer. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think. But I think we will start to wrap it up there, because I think I've gotten across all that I needed to with regards to what we're going to be doing moving forwards. The stuff that's a little bit further off in the future, which is a little bit less concrete, when next year rolls around, there might be a little bit more upheaval, in the sense that I might need to move again, but that may not be until effectively like September or August next year. So it's not the sort of thing that I need to concern myself with at the moment. Everything could fall through in that regard anyway, so no need to worry about that. Bannerlord is also the sort of thing which I do want to explore a bit, but as I said, if I was going to do that, I would want to do it in a stream format, because I think it's much better as a stream game, because it's very long-winded. It's similar in many ways to a Total War campaign, and I think it just works better in a stream format. So if I'm able to nail down a somewhat reliable schedule for streaming, even with the work rota being what it is, then maybe Bannerlord could start to make an appearance as well when I get my new hardware, because at this point we will start to see mods really gather traction in Bannerlord, I would imagine. Hey man, missed the stream, but we'll watch the VOD. Hey there, Brady. The VOD will be going up pretty much instantaneously after this, to be honest, because I've got nothing more to say. And big thank you to everyone for tuning in. I know that with regards to streaming, I've been hideously unreliable, and it is the sort of thing which bums me out a little bit, because I was really enjoying the streaming that I was doing towards the tail end of last year. The campaigns were really, really good and really going quite well. The Ar-Adonaian one in particular was really quite enjoyable. The Lothlorien one perhaps was maybe the best from a viewer's perspective, because it was actually a divide and conquer campaign where someone was genuinely struggling for once, given the constant barrage Karas Galadon was under. But it's the sort of thing that I want to do again as well. But much like Bannerlord, it's the sort of thing which I'll have to kick that particular can down the road until I can actually stream on a more regular basis again. I might be streaming again sooner than you'd think, because there is a Silmarillion tournament, as I said, and if I can get involved with that, I will. But there's no guarantees about that. Even in the winter, streaming midweek spontaneously is going to be fairly difficult, but we'll see. Anyway, as I said, I won't ramble for too much longer, because no one likes that. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you will continue to put up with my nonsense as my work continues to get in the way of my channel, but as I said, hopefully moving into next year, it's not the sort of thing that I want to talk about just yet. That'll be the sort of thing which, when I do my next channel update, which will be at some point in maybe late winter, early spring 2022, then I'll be able to talk about maybe more of my long-term plans, hopefully, if they actually do start to come to fruition. So yeah, big thank you for tuning in, everyone. I hope you found this somewhat informative, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which is going to be a scenario that was given to me by Eclipse. So yeah, I hope to see you for that. Goodbye.